Good. So thank you for making the trek down the escalator and being in the room. I really appreciate your time, attention, and all the things that we're about to do. So those of you coming in the room now, just come join us up here in the front. A quick show of hands. Just want to kind of get a feel for the audience and know a little bit more about where you come from. How many of you in the room have had the opportunity somewhere over the course of growing up or in your career to show livestock? Quick show of hands. This is okay, I was pretty sure I had a fairly good idea what that looks like, and if you don't have your hands up, that's okay. Maybe your upbringing was a little bit more like mine. Being honest with you. Guys, I'll tell you this, I would have loved to have the opportunity growing up to have something to show at the county fair like the rest of my friends in the Golden Gopher 4-H Club up in central Minnesota. Would have loved to have it. I begged my dad to get a steer. You know, we didn't have a big operation, but we had a few acres. We could have had a steer, and I could have showed that at the county fair, just like my friends in the 4-H club. I thought, you know what? Maybe a pig. What a great option. Have a pig to show at the county fair. I always got shut down. Always got shut down. There's not time for that. There's not money for that. That's not what we do. Stay true to who you are, those kind of things. He always would talk about staying home and playing home base and things like that. I didn't have that opportunity. I would have taken a chicken. A chicken would have been good. Okay? Have a chicken to show at the county fair. That would have been better. There was no category for what I did growing up, and I grew up rural. I grew up on a dirt road. It's just that my dad was a leech farmer. I stunned silence, I know, right? What the heck is a leech farmer? Guys, we were the second largest exporter of live leeches for fishing bait in the state of Minnesota by the time I was in high school. Okay, this is what we did. Now, I don't know if you've been to a county fair in Minnesota or Iowa lately, but there's no category or barn at the county fair to show leeches. There's nothing for it. They don't even have ribbons for that. Okay, not even the participant ones. Okay, they don't have those kind of things. I grew up trapping leeches. We had, in central Minnesota, central to northern Minnesota, you have the most abundant resource of naturally existing leeches on the planet. And it was my job to take my John boat, my 500 leech traps, I'll describe that in a second, and a bucket of beef liver and go out and put these traps into a pond and catch leeches to sell in the business. So number one, there's no time. Number two, there's no category to be able to show these things at the county fair. But who could guess? What do you think? What's one of the most common questions I get when I tell audiences that I grew up trapping leeches, farming leeches, things like that? What would you guys estimate? What's a common question? Yeah, what do you grow them in? So that's a common one, right? And any guesses on another very common question? Yeah, what do they, and how do you get them to eat it, right? How do you catch a leech? Now, when this is over, not now, but when this is over, you can get on your phones, go on the YouTube, type in how to trap leeches. I have the #1 video in all of YouTube land for how to trap leeches. Okay, it's got 123,000 views. We're really cooking. I need to start monetizing this thing. So, but in brief description, it looks kind of like this. I'm going to tear a little piece of paper out just to show you what this looks like. So you guys, you've seen a sheet of aluminum, you know, just like a little sheet of 12 gauge aluminum kind of looks like. They're kind of flimsy. You can fold it. So we get a big sheet of aluminum about this wide, about that wide, or about that long, and you fold it up kind of like a paper cord. You fold it in half like this, okay? And then you fold the other side down in half kind of like this. And it's like you're making a paper accordion, if you've ever made one of those when you were bored back in school. And it ends up looking like this. You get a little W shape. So then here's what we do. We hog ring this end together. I have a template where I cut a 5-foot string. Okay, we cut a 5-foot string. We take a piece of that string, tie it on here, put it on here. We tie a little piece of styrofoam as a bobber or a float to indicate where that trap is in the water. And then we go into in Long Prairie, Minnesota, where I grew up. There's a little place called Long Prairie Packing. They butcher a lot of cattle there. We go into Long Prairie Packing. We buy beef liver by the ton. We got a big meat grinder on the farm. It's big enough that to run it, you got to hook it up to the PTO on the tractor. That's how big this meat grinder is. And we run that beef liver through that grinder, and that's how you make leech bait. So then you take a little ice cream pail full of leech bait, you take your traps, you take your John boat, and you pull those out into wherever you can find water, and you start putting traps into these ponds to catch them back. And those leeches will go into that little fold after that little bit of beef liver, and you check them every day. That's how you trap leeches. So there's a little insight into my upbringing in my older years. Now, how many of you in your business, regardless of what your business is, for how many of you is safety like an important aspect of what you do? I don't care if you're in manufacturing, if you're in pork production, somebody's watching, right? Somebody's making sure that you're doing something, whether it's safety training, you've got records. I'm going to be honest with you. OSHA's not watching the leech trappers. Okay? Like, they don't care about my training logs, if you will. They don't want to know. We're not really on their radar, not an important piece of their business. So safety training at Jewell Bait Company looked kind of like this. Sounded actually like this. It would be the old man saying something like, Jewell. He called me Jewell. He never called me Mark. Always call me Jewell. Jewell, don't fall on the damn boat. Right? And if you're kind of a smart ass like I was, you might say, well, why? Right? Because you're wearing chest waders. What happens if you're wearing chest waders and you fall out of the boat? Yeah, they get filled up with water, and what happens? Yeah, very blunt. Thanks, Rob. You drown. Okay? They fill up with water. You wear these chest waders. Water can't get out. That's what they're there for, is to keep it out. But when they fill up, you get heavy. And then you sink. And then you drown. Thank you. So don't fall out of the boat. So here's what happens. One day in May, I'm about 2 weeks shy of my 18th birthday. Okay? This is now going back over half a lifetime ago. Still one of the most traumatic events in my life. I'm out of my little John boat. It looks kind of like this. I'm going to move. I can't move that too far. Let's just pretend that this is a boat. I've got a 6-foot set of oars. Okay? Because Dad won't let me have a motor. This builds character. So I'm rowing. And the way this works is you grab the oar with your right hand, you grab the float on the trap with your left hand, and then you pull them up. And then you take the leeches, you take your little trap, and you've got a Rubbermaid tub, and you take a rubber scraper that you steal from Mom's kitchen, and then you scrape the leeches into the tub. You rebait the trap, you put it back in the water, and you move on. You do this 500 times a day. So I'm about 2 weeks shy of my 18th birthday. I've done this probably a couple million times at this point in my life. So I'm rowing along, and it's one of these cold days, kind of like about 32 to 34, middle of May. The ice had just gone out 2 weeks ago. Water temp's about 36 degrees. Air temp is about 36 degrees. It's cold. The chest waders help keep you warm, but your hands get cold, your arms get cold. So I'm rowing along, and the wind starts to pick up. And so what you do is you position your boat so you lean into the wind, right? Because what would happen if you leaned away from the wind and a wave hits, right? You're going over. You do what Dad says not to do. Don't fall out of the boat. So I'm holding onto this thing. I reach in to grab this float, and the wind pushes me away. I've done this before. I've done this a million times. You just reach a little bit further, right? And the wind keeps blowing. And I miss it. And I got to lean. And this is where the safety training would have come in real handy, because at this point you might have had the thought, hey, idiot, reposition. But I don't. I keep leaning, and I keep leaning, and all of a sudden, boom, this hand comes off, and I do exactly what the old man had said not to do, and I fell out of the boat. Now, by the grace of God, somehow I caught the edge of that boat on my way out. And so, thankfully, I was not yet sinking. I could pull myself back into the boat, or so I thought. But what happens when you pull on the edge of a boat while it's floating in the water? It tips. And here comes the 10 pounds of leeches that I had just caught. Up out of that tub, off the side of the boat, off my chin, and down into my waders. So now, did you ever have like a really sucky day at work? You don't know. You have no idea. So I'm trying to get back, but that is the least of my problems. I am not worried about 10 pounds of leeches swimming around in my pants. I'm worried about getting back into this boat because it's cold. And I'm freezing. And I'm trying everything I can to get into this boat to get out of the water. And time goes by, and I start to doubt, like, I don't know how I'm going to get back in. And finally I'm doing this on the edge just to try to stay up, and I'm losing strength, and I'm shivering. And I start to think, can I wait until the wind blows me across the pond and I could get out on the other side? But it's blowing good, but it's not that good. It'll take too long. It's a 10-acre piece of water. What else? And I keep trying to do this, try to pull myself in, and I'm getting desperate. And I start to think, man, there's a really good chance that this is where it goes, right? Eventually, I'm going to lose the strength. And my mind started going there. I started to give up. And then the thought occurred to me, just boom. The light bulb went off. I started to vision how I made all those strings that are on that trap, those 5-foot strings cut on a template, so they're all 5 foot long. And that trap sits down there on the bottom of that pond. And that floats up there on top of that pond, so the distance between them can't be any more than 5 foot. And I realized, Mark Jewell is 6'2". So I stood up, and I pulled my boat to shore. You ever have one of those days at work when it just feels like all the things are going against you, and it's all rolling, the you-know-what is all rolling downhill, right? And you just feel like you can't get out of it. You're just surviving the day. Yeah, that's what that feels like. The direction that I want to go with you guys here today, while we're all together, is just to see, while I'm going through those moments, while I'm surviving in life, while I'm surviving at work, in a relationship, in my body, or at home, or wherever the survival is happening for you right now, could we leave something behind in your mind today, so that when that happens again, because it's going to happen, right? Life's going to happen. Okay, you're going to have the moments, even though I know what I know, and I practice what I practice, and I preach what I preach, and I live what I preach, I still have moments where I feel like I'm struggling. So when that happens, my hope is you walk away with just one little thing out of here today that will help you know that sometimes all you got to do is just stand up. Or sometimes all you got to do is reach out. Or sometimes all you got to do is phone a friend. Right? But we got to remember to do it, even though you know what to do, and even though it's pretty obvious what we get to do. What I've noticed as I get to go to work, as I get to go and do a lot of things with a lot of different companies in and around agribusiness, is I see a lot of companies that are thriving. I see a lot of people that are doing well. I see people having spurts of thriving in their career, in moments where it just is rocking. And I see a lot of people that are really struggling. Quick show of hands if you know somebody in this industry who's just really struggling, whether it's financially, emotionally, spiritually, something, right? If you know anybody in dairy, right? I mean, we survive, right? And a lot of it is just past programming. We continue to repeat a lot of the same mistakes, and we keep having these ups and downs in the markets, and everybody's waiting for the next Trump tweet to make you or break you or something, right? But these are the things, and I'm just here to pose this idea, the survival mode's got to end. It's just silly. What if we got to have something. Right? And so today my hope is give you, within these 3 buckets, I hope that you find that one thing that you'll remember to do. That one thing that when you find yourself in survival mode, this is the thing that I do to put an end to it as we start diving into this. So here's what we find. At MJST, we preach this, we teach this, we work through these things, we coach our clients on these 3 big buckets, and I've got a couple clients in the room that can attest to it. The buckets are clarity, certainty, and capacity. Okay? People who thrive through any situation know how to find their way back to their clarity. Okay? People who thrive through any situation, no matter how bad it gets, know how to operate with some level of certainty. Okay? And people who thrive through any level of uncertainty or any situation that seems to be less than desirable, that can find a way to thrive even in survival mode, have the capacity to do so. So, before we were in the fishing bait business at Jewell Bait, we had a different place same place that we lived on, but a different name for the same place. It was called the Rocky Slope Game Farm. Okay? The Rocky Slope Game Farm. My dad had 500 fox on this place. We raised them like a cow-calf herd. And that was what we did. Now, he was also a great trapper, right? He was also, he was the guy who could catch anything. Now, how many of you remember a time back around, let's call it, 86, 87, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark, when an animal rights activist in New York City, up there in Times Square, took a can of red paint and threw it all over the fox fur coat of one of the wives of one of the Beatles? Anybody remember this happening? If we had YouTube back then, it would have been viral. For the day it went viral, that video was on the NBC, CBS, and ABC nightly news. Right? The effect of that propaganda was the price of fur declined over the next few weeks by about 90%. And we were sitting on a warehouse full of fur. 1,500 fox pelts, mink, beaver, coon, all of it. I'll just ask you this, pose this question real quick. What happens in your business if the value of the livestock that you have, or the corn in your bins, or any of that stuff, if it were to drop 90% overnight? Done, right? Pure survival mode, yeah? Pure survival mode. So isn't it interesting, right? So it's interesting. And long story short, we lost that business. If the old man were still alive today, he would tell you the story how he came within 2 days of having the eviction notice put on the front door. That pile of eviction bank statements, all the things, right? Piling high within 2 days of having that notice tacked on the front door. Somehow he found a way to get through that. He did what he had to do. But the one thing he was certain about, the one thing he knew how to do, was trap. The one thing he knew how to do was catch things. So he said, what else could I trap? This business is dust. This business is gone. I'm no longer a fur trader and trapper. That's not my identity anymore. And that was tough. That's what he'd done his whole life. But he knew how to trap. And so that trap that I described to you, he invented it. He figured out a better mouse trap, a better leech trap. And he went and he started catching leeches. And then he found people to buy those leeches. And then he found more people to buy those leeches, and more and more and more. And the business grew to a point. One summer, we sold, in about 1996, before Canada shut the borders to aquatic species crossing the border, we sold 16,000 pounds of leeches. Take that about times 200 on average. Okay, that'll give you the number of leeches we had going through our place, but about 200 per pound on average. So, but it was in that moment, that certainty, like, what did he know how to do? He knew how to catch stuff. He had an instinct, he had a desire, and then years and years of practice of learning how to catch things, knowing how to catch things. Certainty, okay? Even in times of uncertainty, the certainty of knowing what you know, right, and the ability to build new skills will help you get through to the other side. That's an important aspect. But it's only a portion, okay? It's only a small piece. Go back a little bit before he lost the fur business. After smoking for 28 years, the old man had been diagnosed with tongue cancer. Okay? If you're chewing or smoking, just friggin' quit it, all right? Like, it's going to come back to haunt you in some way at some point. Just get it out. He was diagnosed with tongue cancer, and I was about 2 or 3 years old at the time. I don't remember a lot of what was going on. This is the early 80s, but a cancer diagnosis is scary enough today. Imagine the early 80s, and it's in your mouth. That was a pretty scary diagnosis back then. But as the story goes, and he would tell me time and time again over the years, the day he got his diagnosis, he was devastated. He smoked all the next day, and the very next day he woke up and he said, I decide to live. I make it through this. Went cold turkey after 28 years. Boom, done. Right? 41 doses of radiation in the mouth. Cut out part of the tongue. Whatever it took, he didn't care. Whatever it takes, the end of this, the one main thing that I do with this is I live. That's it. He was clear, right? And guys, how often, when uncertain times arise in our life, how often do we start to lose clarity on why we're doing it? Right? If I could get an honest show of hands real quick, how many of you have ever had a moment in your life where you lost motivation, like you feel like you just kind of don't want to get up and go today? right? I don't want to talk to that person anymore, right? We have these moments of lack of motivation. What we like to say at MJST is that motivation doesn't exist, okay? I can't roll up to Walmart or go down to the feed store and buy a bucket of motivation. It's not tangible. Motivation is a descriptor, okay? It's a descriptor for how I feel when I'm clear on what I'm creating. You get what I'm saying? When I lack motivation, it means I forgot why I got up this morning. When I lack motivation, I forgot why I do this job anymore. When I lack motivation, I forget why I wanted to be in this industry to begin with. You know, for the old man in that point in his life, his motivation, the only acceptable outcome was I live. And so driving that 2 hours from Long Prairie, Minnesota, down to the Twin Cities to the University of Minnesota Cancer Hospital, I'm guessing there's some days he didn't want to go get another dose of radiation and be sick. I can only imagine. But the only acceptable outcome was he's clear, he comes out. Pretty thankful he did. That had a pretty big impact on my life, obviously. So we have to have clarity. We have to have certainty. But what about this capacity thing? Right? What about this capacity thing? So you might, like me, after hearing this one, feel a little sorry for the old man. It was about 1983, 84 when he developed tongue cancer, about 1987 when he lost his business. And then the next date comes on about November 10th, 1990. So this is like a 7-year window. I'm 9. I'm outside throwing wood in the basement because that's how we made heat at our house. Mom is sleeping in the house because she was working the overnight. As we recovered from the fur crisis, that was the only time my mom ever had a job. Dad drove bus. Mom worked at the nursing home, and she worked the overnight shift. I'm not to disturb Mom. Okay? When Mom is sleeping after working the overnight, you don't go in and disturb that. Don't touch Mom. Don't poke the bear. Don't poke Mama Bear. Okay, this is the basic lesson. The phone rings, and we got one of those big outdoor ringers on the farm, like you guys probably have or you've seen. And when we still had landlines anyway, and so I run in the house. I pick up the phone. It's Mike. He's a rancher from down the road, and one of my dad's hunting party that morning was opening morning of shotgun deer season in central Minnesota. Right? So they're out hunting, and I was like, "Why is Mike calling?" I talked to Mike, and he's like, "Mark, I need to talk to your mom." Well, she's sleeping. I'm not supposed to talk to her. I'm not supposed to bug her. Mark, I need to talk to your mom now. And I can hear the tension in his voice. All right, so I put down the phone. I go get Mom. She comes. She picks up the phone. And I can't hear the conversation, but I can watch the blood drain from her face, and I can watch her posture start to sink as Mike tells her what happened. She hangs up the phone. Mark, go change your clothes. You need to go get some clean clothes on right now. We're going into the hospital. Your dad's been shot. I don't think. I just do. I do what Mom tells me to do. I go and I just put on some clean denim and I get in the little hatchback 1984 Ford Escort while Mom speeds into town on these windy central Minnesota roads. We speed into town. We pull up to the emergency room, and I don't know if you guys remember, back in 1990, we didn't care about kids quite as much as we do today. Okay? We didn't pay as much attention, so we jump out of the car. Mike is there, the hunting party's there, the sheriff is there, the Department of Natural Resources. Everybody's all over Mom, consoling her, telling her what happened, describing the situation, here's what's going on. And I wander. I just wander. And I come to a double door about the width of the double door in the back of the room on either side of this room. And what I see going on is this chaotic, busy scene of nurses flying around, prepping my dad to go to the operating room. And here's him laid on this table. His shirt is off. He's got a softball-sized hole blown out of his right side from a 12-gauge slug that entered over here, went across his body, and blew out the right side. I am frozen. I don't know what to think. I just see blood. I see fat. I see this, right? I see the scene. I see the nurses cutting his boots off. And we grew up poor, and he was yelling at them, "Don't cut off my boots because we don't waste things." But I remember that, but I'm just like, I'm froze in the moment. The next thing I know, my mom is standing here, and they're wheeling him out on the gurney to go to the operating room. And he stops in the doorway. He has the presence of mind to ask the nurses to pause while he takes his mask off, his oxygen mask, with his left hand. And he reaches up with his right hand, looks me in the eye with his big baby blues, and he says, "You take care of things." And then they wheeled him off. Now, I didn't grasp the gravity maybe in that moment, but there's a really good chance I don't ever talk to him again. It was a pretty severe injury. And I remember that day, and we got sent to go stay with neighbors, and we had to wait and all the things. But I'll tell you this. 10 days after that, we got to go back into the hospital. We go into the hospital room of the old man. He made it out of the surgery. And he is sitting on the edge of his bed as the nurse wheels in a wheelchair. And he says, or she says to him, "Jim," his name was Jim, "Jim, here's your ride out of here." And he gets up and he takes that wheelchair and he shoves it back at her, and he says, "Nope, I'm walking out of this place." Yeah. Give you a little bit of background on his character and his capacity to deal with adversity. Because think of what he'd been through to that point. Right? I mean, just in 7 years' time, cancer, big deal. All the things. By the way, the financial hardship. Right? It's not like we ever made a lot in the fur industry. Loses his business. Now this. Now, I think this is the kind of audience I can share a story like this with, and I'm going to go a little bit further than I normally go with a lot of groups that I talk to, because I think you guys deserve it, and I think you guys will get it. Somewhere between the day 1 and day 10, he was really struggling emotionally. Why are all these things happening? How does this continue to happen? Right? What is the meaning of all this? Why do these things, and in 7 years, that's a lot in 7 years. Any one of those is a lot in a single lifetime. 3 in a 7-year window. What's going on? It was really, so he said, I got to get this, I got to talk to somebody. Now, my dad was not he may have been spiritual, he was not a religious man. Okay, and this was not his thing. I can remember one time growing up Catholic where Dad was actually at church with us, but he had his spiritual guide was a man named Harold. Now, Harold was a dairy farmer, and he was about as crude as they come. He was about as crude as, but Harold had been on his way to become a priest. He was one day away from becoming an actual priest, from becoming ordained, and he left the monastery, came home, got married, became a dairy farmer. And so he was a real salt of the earth kind of individual. He would call up to talk to my dad sometimes, and I'd answer the phone, and I'd say, "Jewels," and I'd hear from the other end, "This is God speaking." It's the kind of guy he was. He was a real jokester, and nothing short on the curse words either, okay? And I think that's why my old man related to him. And he said he wanted to talk to Harold. So my mom got Harold to come into the hospital. It's late at night, and they're sitting in his hospital room, and he was describing his emotional pain. He didn't have words of like emotional pain for himself, and certainly not in 1990, but it was emotional pain. He's describing this, and Harold said, "You just need to cry. You need to get this out of you." And the old man, that 50-ish years old at the time, said, "I don't know how. Don't know how." Harold said, "Well, sometimes when people commit to their higher power and turn their life over and finally surrender, sometimes that helps. Are you ready to stop putting that off, to open yourself up to that?" And finally he did. And that was the moment right there where all that emotion that had been backlogged from 49, 50 years of trauma and pain and all the things that he had never gotten out before came flowing out of him. And I didn't know that story till years after it happened when my mom told me, right? But I sit back and I think, sometimes things that we categorize as bad or traumatic, they happen, right? But if that's what it took, right? If it was that level of pain, if that's what it took, was it maybe worth it? And I had conversations with him later on, and he said, absolutely. He said, I don't want to get shot again. But to have what he had and to have what he ended up with, I kept him around for 25 more years after that. Okay? So, sometimes I know bad things are going to happen, or things we'd categorize as bad, but there's really no bad experience in life, just things that level up our capacity. Here's the thing, from that moment of that spiritual recognition and going through the physical pain and all the healing and all the things that came up, on the backside of that, holy cow, I grew up with a way different dad than my sisters did, who were much older than I was. I grew up with somebody, here's a guy who, when I graduated from college at the University of Minnesota, he sent me a box, and in it was a box of inspirational spiritual books and a Bible. The title of this particular Bible, The Possibility Thinker's Bible. Right? His capacity to serve, his capacity to grow. And it was only after that time when he grew the leech business, the bait business, to be the second largest wholesaler of live leeches out of the state of Minnesota. Right? His capacity grew. So yes, things are going to happen. Traumatic experiences are going to come up. Markets are going to dip. Farmers are going to struggle. You're going to struggle. You have mental struggles and social struggles. And sometimes the industry seems like it's constantly in survival mode, yeah? But where is it taking us? Where is it possibly getting us to? Because I want you to just go back and look at this. Let's look at clarity for a second, okay? This motivation doesn't exist until you feel clear on what you're creating. Motivation doesn't exist. It's what you feel when you're clear on what you're creating, okay? So what is the only acceptable outcome for agriculture? You have to win. Get this, when my dad was going through tough stuff in the fur industry, and the moment when the fur crisis happened was not the first time that animal rights were attacking the fur buyers and the fur producers and those kind of things. Like, we experienced the same things back in the 70s and 80s that y'all experience now. Okay? And my dad, driving to one of his cancer treatments one day with my grandpa in all of his wisdom, just desperate for answers because he knew he could see what was coming, he said, when are people going to stop trying to influence how we live our life? When are people going to stop trying to impact how we produce our livelihood? When are people going to stop trying to impact how we produce food on this planet? You know what my grandpa said? When they get hungry. And you guys are too damn good at what you do, and you're not going to let that happen, because that would be inhumane. Motivation doesn't exist. It is what you feel when you're clear on what you're creating. There is only one acceptable outcome. That we do what we do, and we get exponentially better at it, and until we can feed, 9 or eventually 11 billion people. Okay, and I think after that it gets easier. I think we start to decline. Okay, but you got to get to the end of the century. Okay. The skill sets required to accomplish that task, the skill sets required to accomplish that mission are infinitely and growing more and more important, because you have to have the certainty, competency, getting better at skills, the practices that we do, a ruthless commitment to being better all the time, okay, drives certainty little by little. I mean, just look around. Like, what you can produce in agriculture, specifically the pork industry today, is exponentially better than 50 years ago when my dad was doing it. It's not even close. Okay? Competency drives, so we have a certainty that we can uphold a certain level, right? And if we just keep driving on, that will continue to get better. There's no such thing as a bad experience. Only those that grow our personal capacity to do more to help others. Okay? I'm not going to say that there won't be more attacks on the pork industry. I'm not going to say that there won't be more hard times in the industry. I'm not going to say that there may not be other recessions or market dips. And a lot of my friends are claiming there's going to be another global recession in 2020. Who knows? We know it's going to happen, but we also know that those things are there not to knock us out, not just to kill us. And maybe some people think that they want us to stop, but the reality is we have to persist, because you have to. It is a must. It is the only acceptable outcome. And so as we continue to grow through those times, we emerge better. We emerge with greater capacity. This is how we thrive through uncertain times. By getting clear on what you want. By having a great level of certainty. Right? And by just knowing that even though we're being tested, we're also being proven. There was some words written coming up on 100 years ago by a guy called E.M. Tiffany in 1933. The first paragraph of the FFA Creed. I believe in the future of agriculture with a faith born not of words but of deeds. Achievements won by present and past generations of agriculturists in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. See, the bad things aren't happening to knock you down. That may be somebody's intent, but they're happening to you because you have the clarity on what you're creating. You have the certainty to do more and to get better. And you have the capacity, growing exponentially all the time, to be able to do and to produce more. Even as the things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. Somewhere in the Bible it says, consider it all joy. Not just the things you want. All of it. Right? It's perfecting us little by little. I want to help you just understand one more thing here real quick as I sort of start to bring this in for a landing. I read a book called Success Principles by Jack Canfield. Jack Canfield wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, or he was one of the co-authors for Chicken Soup for the Soul. You've seen a copy of that somewhere. Principle number 3 in the Success Principles book is that you're 100% responsible. And I read that book and I said, 100% responsible for everything that happens in my life? Come on, Jack. Right? And actually I have this conversation frequently with Jack when things happen in my life that I don't like and I don't want to own. Right? Because this is kind of a crappy statement. Okay? But I read the book and I said, Jack, when my wife does this, right, is that really, my fault? Well, it may not be your fault that she said it, but, who married her? I'm like, Jack, you're kind of a jerk, man. Right? What about when my kids do, right, the things that I don't like? When do they leave all their stuff out even though I told them, right? Well, it may not be your fault that they weren't listening, but at the end of the day, they're kind of a reflection of you, right? Who created them? I would run all my work stuff, my financial situation, my health situation, all the things, right? Not everything that happens in my life is my fault. I can't prevent other people from doing stupid stuff. It is my responsibility for how I react to it. I said, now, you know what, Jack? I got one part of my life that absolutely is not true. This one I do not claim responsibility for. He said, what is it? Okay, I'm not actually talking to him. I just have these conversations with him in my head. But he said, what is it? Well, when I was 16... I got in a car wreck. I was driving my little Mazda B2000 pickup truck down a gravel road coming up over a hill. And I get to the top of the hill. Here's a John Deere 4430 pulling a chopper and a chopper box driving on my side of the road. And I wham right into the front end of that thing. My head ended up being where the rock box should have been had they not taken it off that tractor 24 hours earlier. My femur was busted in two. My tibia and my fibula are shattered. Okay, I'm pretty busted up. I could literally, once the jaws of life come to cut me out and they took the top of the truck off, I could reach out and touch the John Deere symbol on the front of the tractor. That's how close I was. I said, Jack, I didn't put that guy on the wrong side of the stupid road. Everybody knows you don't drive on the wrong side of a road, especially on a gravel hill, on a gravel road, right? Come on, Jack, explain that one. Well, I said, let's rewind. What were you doing that put you in that situation? I said, well, I was out bow hunting. Bow hunting. Who made you do that? I'm like, well, I guess it was my idea. Cool, so what happened is I was out there in the deer stand, and here's what happens in the deer stand, and I could hear him coming, walking through the leaves. It was October, late October, crunching through the leaves. I could hear him working a scrape back behind this little thicket, okay? And it was getting pretty dark, but I knew if I could just get a little bit of moonlight, I might be able to see through my peep and get a shot at this thing. If you hunt, I know you've done this, okay? I'm not the only one who stays till after dark. I'm out there in the tree waiting for this thing to come, and finally he does. And he comes around the end of this little thicket, hopping along. The biggest bushy-tailed gray squirrel that you ever saw. Okay? I mean, real deal. Like, we could have got some eating off of that one. So who made you stay and wait for the squirrel? I guess I got to own that one, don't I? Yeah. So then what happened? Well, I walk across half a section, get to my pickup, and I get in and turn on the radio. And my favorite song of the day, this is circa October 26, 1997, you guys, Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba. Some of y'all don't know what that is, and that's okay. But it was popular amongst the teenagers from the late 90s, and the words are, I get knocked down, I get up again. I had no idea how relevant that was about to become in the next 5 minutes, right? And I'm jamming along, I get knocked down, I get up again, you're never going to keep me down. Those are literally the lyrics of the song as I drive down that gravel road at about 35 miles an hour. It's like, oh, who turned on the radio? I turned on. Were you jamming out a little bit? Maybe a little bit distracted? Yeah, radio was like the cell phone of the 90s. Okay, yeah, that might have been a little bit distracted. What happened when you turned the corner? How fast were you going? I was going about 35. Well, why not 25? Gravel road. Be safe. You would have been there about 5 or 10 seconds later. Maybe. Could have gone 45. What about that? Well, you've been there 5 seconds sooner. Either way, that accident doesn't happen. So Jack says, Mark, it wasn't your fault that the tractor was where it was when it got there, but it is your responsibility to deal with how you deal with it going forward. And I still don't want to admit to this day, because there's a piece of me that wants to disown the responsibility. But here's the thing. Sometimes rough things are going to happen. Challenging circumstances will arise. Difficult situations will come up. That is the reality. We know that's going to happen. The triggers will always be there. And it may not be your fault. It is your responsibility to deal with what happens. And how you deal with it is completely up to you. Your triggers are your issue, not anybody else's. So as I look at where we go, like what is the call, right, to thrive into the future? Okay? Thriving is not something that just happens once in a while. Thriving is not something that you just get to feel once in a while if you choose it. Thriving is a mindset. And it boils down to these 3 buckets. Clarity, certainty, and capacity. And this is what we have to do. As we adopt these mindsets, and when we do we coached over 400 people throughout agribusiness this last year, and we try to instill these concepts, and we give them the tools to be able to live this out in their lives at home and at work every single day. And here's what happens little by little. We have people that are owning their story more. They're becoming more and more responsible, right, Amanda, for what's going on in their life, and they're owning their stuff. And here's the result of that. Little by little, we grow the clarity of the industry. Little by little, we grow the certainty of the industry. Little by little, we grow the capacity to be able to produce what we need to produce and in the lifestyle that we want to live it in. Little by little. So at MJST, I want to invite you guys really quick to this. If you want more of this content, some of these things, this is a free app. You just download that from the App Store, put it on your phone. If you forget about it, that's fine. Come back to it when you're looking for some content. There's also some cool stuff you can do there on a daily basis. It's free. I'm not going to sell you anything in it. It's just there. Use it. There's tons and tons of reading and a community of people from agribusiness that are committed to thriving through whatever it takes. So thank you guys very much for the opportunity to be in here, to work with Iowa Pork. Always a privilege. Jamie, thank you very much. This has been really awesome to be out here with you guys today. Such a fun group to work with. Guys, everything else outside of this is just surviving. It's our time to thrive today. That's what it says on the shirt. Okay? So let's go get it. Thank you.